Hello and welcome to Father Spitzer's Universe at the intersection of faith and reason. I'm Doug Keck, your host, coming to you live from our EWTN studios in Irondale, Alabama, the mothership, the home of EWTN. Email us questions, as always, at spitzer'suniverse@ewtn.com. Post your questions on Facebook at facebook.com/EWTN online. And there's a hashtag, Father Spitzer's Universe. That's hashtag FSUniverse. And also send us a tweet at twitter.com, EWTN, hashtag, again, FS Universe. So it's very complicated, all these different ways for young people to get in touch with us. And of course, Father and the Magis Center is always a place to go for more information. Their website is magiscenter.com. And of course, we have the wonderful one and only Father Robert Spitzer coming to us live from our West Coast studios in Orange County, California. Again, Father, we turn to you once more this Wednesday to talk about a topic of great import to our audience, the evidence of God's existence. And this time we're going to be talking a little bit about the Galileo affair. And we're not talking about the episode from Star Trek, but we are actually talking about the fact that the whole issue with Galileo seems to be used against the church many times in an attempt to show how unscientific the church tended to be. So let's talk about the evidence of God's existence and Galileo. You want to get us started?
Sure. Maybe I'll just start with Galileo, and we can get into the evidence of God's existence in the contemporary era from science a little bit later. But just, to straighten out the historical case with respect to Galileo, the first thing I think we need to note is that the church was never against the heliocentric universe, and certainly was not against the natural sciences. If you go back to my program from a couple of weeks ago, I talked about four, priests who were very much involved in the forefront of the natural sciences, including Father Georges Lemaitre, who discovered the Big Bang Theory, Gregor Mendel, of course, who was the father of quantitative genetics, but also was an abbot and an Augustinian monk. And then we talked about Nicholas Steno, who of course was a bishop, a Catholic Danish bishop. And we talked about Nicholas Copernicus, who was the first person to have discovered and mathematically made probable or even possible the heliocentric solar system. Now that was a huge development, and the church, by the way, Nicholas Copernicus was a Catholic cleric. He had minor orders and was a canon lawyer, and of course, the Pope Paul III was the person to whom Nicholas Copernicus dedicated his book on the heliocentric solar system and the mathematical evidence for its possibility. So the church was never against the heliocentric universe, certainly not against the natural sciences, always in the forefront of the natural sciences. So that wasn't the issue with respect to Galileo. Mm-hmm. The issue really comes down to this. Galileo, as you know, it was using a telescope. He discovered some lunar orbits around Jupiter, and he had a hunch, basically, and that's all there was a hunch that maybe the solar system followed the patterns of the moons around Jupiter, our moon around the Earth, and so forth, that maybe the Earth was going around the sun, that Jupiter and the other planets were also going around the sun in this heliocentric system, and that the Earth was not at the center of the solar system. Now, of course, as I said before, Nicholas Copernicus had already made this possible. The Catholic Church had already accepted it as a possibility. Now, the interesting thing was, when Galileo put this forward, he worked with the Jesuits at the Roman College, and the Jesuits at the Roman College, by the way, helped Galileo to formulate the mathematics to show this. But there was one requirement, and it's the same requirement we have today for the natural sciences. Namely, you have to have observational evidence for the theory to back it up. Now, of course, today we have peer-reviewed journals. So if you come up with a theory, but you don't have the evidence from observation, the evidence from the natural world around you, then of course the peer-reviewed journal will simply say, hey, we can't accept this article. It's not a scientific fact. You can't proclaim something to be a scientific fact. You can't say that it's proved before you have the observational evidence in. Now, the interesting thing was that Pope Urban VIII, who was frankly a very good friend of Galileo's.
Right, that's what
and
I understand.
In fact, himself was.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly
that's right.
what
He was a mathematician, and like the Jesuits at the Roman College, was a very good friend of Galileo. He told Galileo and made him promise that he would not publish the heliocentric solar system as a fact until there was evidence, observational evidence to prove it. And as I said before, the same thing would be required of Galileo today by any peer-reviewed scientific journal. And in fact, if Galileo did what he did to the Pope, a scientific journal today would make him retract it. In other words, claim that something was a fact without the observational evidence to prove it. But that's all the Pope asked him to do. Respect the rules of observational evidence until you get stellar parallax. And stellar parallax, just simply, it's a technique that means that we can judge by the movement of the stars relative to one another, more distant stars relative to nearer stars. We can make a judgment whether the Earth is rotating around or orbiting around the Sun, or the Sun is orbiting around the Earth. We can tell very definitively. Here's the problem with stellar parallax. Those movements and relative movements of the distant stars relative to the nearer ones are very, very slight perturbations. You need very precise astronomical instruments in order to get it. But the technique is called stellar parallax. It can be measured, but at the time of Galileo, the instruments were very crude. I mean, basically, Galileo took essentially a Dutch spyglass, and that was used for naval purposes, and adapted it for astronomical observations, as did many others, including Johannes Kepler. But the main thing was, it was very crude still. They didn't have really precise instrumentation. So stellar parallax actually seemed to suggest at the time that the geocentric solar system was correct. That's where observational evidence seemed to suggest. But in point of fact, Galileo, instead of waiting until he had all the evidence in, instead of waiting until he could make an observational claim, he went ahead and he publishes in the what's called the two New World systems, right? And he actually puts a very adverse opinion, mocking his friend Pope Urban VIII, right? In essentially calling him simplicius, right? Which means basically a fool or a simpleton. He puts the words of the Pope in the mouth of Simplicius. And of course, once Urban VIII thinks he has been mocked, right? And then on top of it, right, Galileo has gone back on the promise that he made to Urban VIII. He promised he wouldn't do it without the observational evidence, went ahead and did it. And I mean, to talk about sinning boldly, he certainly sinned boldly and mocked the Pope while he was doing it. This really got Pope Urban VIII upset. And here's, just to give a contemporary analogy to this, right? Today we wouldn't view this, okay, so you kind of mock the Pope and so forth.
There's a lot of mocking that goes on in the world today, so especially even of the Pope,
exactly.
So it's not unusual.
That's right. So that's right. But in those days, this would be like publishing this in a scientific tractate and not having the evidence in, and of course having to get a forced retraction because you didn't do what was required scientifically. And Galileo didn't do what was required scientifically. Today, his publication would have been rejected by any peer-reviewed scientific journal because he didn't have the evidence.
Okay, Father, let's stop you there, because I think you've given us a lot to think about in the sense of understanding the relationship between the Pope Galileo. And I think a couple important points you made about the idea of a theory versus it being provable. But let's jump ahead to a question that somebody gave us, Mary Ann from Atlanta, and it kind of fits into this, and you can explore this further. Hello, Father.
Sure.
We are supposed to believe that all that the Catholic Church declares to be revealed by God. How do we reconcile this when it seems that the Church originally didn't accept Galileo's teachings on the universe and then came around to accepting it, much of it later? Okay, and this is Mary Ann from Atlanta. So again, you've kind of talked about the fact of the theory that was there. Let me ask you with that, besides pride and things like that, why do you think, or do you have an opinion of why Galileo kind of double-crossed the Pope and went public?
It's a complete mystery to not only me, but a lot of historians. People just don't know why he did it, why he got out there, why he insulted his friend, why he alienated his Jesuit friends at the Roman College. I mean, ego seems to be a reason, but that it basically seems to be the only reason. He just didn't want to be silenced. But I mean, like I said, in answer to Mary Ann's question, right? Mary Ann, the question wasn't about the heliocentric solar system. The Church had already accepted the possibility of that. We were just waiting for observational evidence. By the way, that observational evidence didn't come until 1832, when the German astronomer Friedrich Bessel actually performed the first accurate stellar parallax, proving the heliocentric solar system. But that's all the Church asked Galileo to do. It wasn't against the heliocentric solar system. It wanted the proof, just like any peer-reviewed scientific journal would want the proof if somebody's going to make the statement, this is a fact. You have to back the fact up with the observational evidence. And Galileo didn't do it. And that's all the Church got mad about, because, of course, he didn't have the evidence. And like I said, scientific journals today would be equally mad if somebody proclaimed something to be a fact without the evidence.
Right, exactly. And we'll get into also the idea, where was, here's a good question, actually it dovetails right into that idea of where was Galileo coming from when he brought this point out, because it seemed like it wasn't just the idea of the theory, but there seemed to be an attack by him on the teachings of the Church, or how the Bible was to be interpreted. So here's a question that came in. Hi, Father Spitzer. Blessings to you and Doug. There has been controversy that Galileo was actually an atheist and therefore did not believe that God existed. Can you address this question? This is Caitlin in Oregon. So is that why he acted that way? What's the take there?
Yeah. Caitlin, I don't think Galileo was an atheist. To be honest with you, I think, Galileo seemed to have, a very credible religious belief. And as I mentioned, he may have had his disagreements with how the Bible was to be interpreted. But no, I don't think he was an atheist. And in fact, he still carried on, very fine relationships with people in the Church, even after his quote-unquote exile. And that exile was a very comfortable exile. Even Alfred North Whitehead, right, a long time ago said, well, as exiles go, this one was a comfortable one in a good Italian villa. And he said it was really a kind of a gentle reproof and a slap on the wrist. And so, essentially what we were dealing with at that juncture was, more a kind of a respectful, exile on the part of the Pope, and also, I think in Galileo's part, not really an atheism, but probably, he had differences from the way the Bible was to be interpreted, and the Church certainly laid those foundations for biblical interpretation later in Divino Afflante Spiritu.
Right, whether there had been an overly literalistic approach to it, or in which ways you could understand what things were to be taken specifically, or how the people of their time would have understood what was being said and what was meant, right?
Right, exactly. So, I mean, back in 1942, right, Pope Pius XII went ahead and laid down those rules in that encyclical Divino Afflante Spiritu. And he basically says, look, you know, there's two views of inspiration, right? You have the dictation view of inspiration. That's where, you know, God would come to the biblical author and go, okay, Spitzer, you know, take down exactly what I say. And there would be no participation in the construction of the text by the biblical author himself. Now, of course, we do not hold that as Catholics. There are some schools of Christian thought that do, but as Catholics, we do not. We hold a co-participative view of a biblical inspiration. That means that the biblical author actually has a part to play in the construction of the text. So he's going to be using categories that come from his culture. He's going to be using, you know, categories that come from his own academic preparation, right? Of course, the biblical author is not going to use scientific concepts, scientific methodology, and complex mathematical conceptualizations. They didn't know anything about that in 500 BC, right? For all intents and purposes, then, what you're dealing with is a, you know, what I would call a view of you know, for Pope Pius XII, you know, a view of inspiration that really says, you know, you have to state this and put this within its context, which is what? The Bible is meant to give sacred truths necessary for salvation. The Bible was not meant to give accurate descriptions of the physical universe according to scientific explanation.
Right, even though we know today that all of the, you know, when it comes to the things of finding in the ancient world, there's more proof of things in the Bible than virtually anything else, and everything we find in the Holy Land there kind of reinforces what was there in Scripture. So here's another question for you, well, which you started to answer, so we'll jump into this one. This one's a little more complicated and brings us up to today. Dear Father Spitzer, was one of the Church's main charges against Galileo about being unscientific in claiming victory, even though at the time there was insufficient evidence to rule out the modified geocentric model of Tycho Brahe? Hope I got that right. Are string theorists, here's where he's jumping today, falling into the even worse error now? Would string theory and other untestable hypotheses be better thought as art, I guess, rather than science? This is from Justin.
You know, Justin, that's a really enlightened question.
Okay.
Because right now, I mean, string theory is certainly possible. It's also an incredibly elegant, really mathematical, lovely theory. But the problem is we don't have any empirical evidence for it. And it seems like it might be very, very difficult to test for a variety of reasons. But the key question that you have is, do we have empirical evidence for string theory today? No, we don't. And here's the interesting thing, is that, you know, my little debate with Stephen Hawking and Leonard Mlodinov and Deepak Chopra on the Larry King Show a while back, that, you know, that surrounded this whole area of whether or not string theory, you know, as Stephen Hawking was holding at the time, that basically string theory is, you know, can explain everything in the universe. Well, there's two reasons why that just can't be the case, and why Stephen Hawking, much brilliant as he is, and by the way, Galileo is also quite brilliant. I mean, you don't develop the law of falling bodies without having some brilliance. And Stephen Hawking, of course, is very brilliant. Everybody acknowledges there's no problem there. Here's the problem. The problem is evidence. And of course, can you then make the claim that string theory can explain everything in our universe? No. Number one, there isn't any empirical evidence for it currently. We don't know. And number two, we don't know whether string theory is all there is. Remember, science is an inductive discipline. Scientists don't know what they don't know until they have discovered it. So therefore, you can never say this is the explanation, because the next day somebody could make a discovery completely unthought of, completely unknown, completely undiscovered, which will change everything. Look at what happened to Sir Isaac Newton in the relativity revolution by Albert Einstein. Enough said. You know, for all intents and purposes, Justin, you're right on the marker. There's no way Stephen Hawking can make that claim, and string theorists can make that claim at this time. They're getting way ahead of themselves. In fact, over their skis, absolutely.
Yeah, I think Isaac Newton had a Apple computer fall on his head, I think, is the way we have it today. So apparently is what actually might have occurred. Now, let me ask you, Father, as we're getting ready to go to a break, let me ask you this one question. It always strikes me, and you made a point of it, is sometimes we talk about science at different times, and people act like what we know today is the ultimate, like you said. While they look at faith and they say, well, this is the truth, and the faith, this is just what you believe. But so many things in the church's teachings have remained consistent over 2,000 years. But if you went and looked at the science and understanding of the world has changed dramatically every 10 years.
Yeah, and that's very true, and of course that's intrinsic to the methods used. I mean, the church is talking about divine inspiration, and of course they have ways of discerning divine inspiration in the defining of doctrine, most especially, of course, being linked back to Jesus and to the apostolic church. But and of course the inspiration of the popes who use Jesus's teachings and those of the apostolic church as a foundation. Now that's very different from science. Scientific methodology, because it is based on observation, remember, observation always has particular facts. You can't draw universal conclusions. A universal conclusion has an all or an only or a none in it. It's talking about everything. So the thing is, you can't get to universal conclusions from science, because science is dependent on particular facts. You know, so we would say one, you know, a prioris can be universal, like in mathematics, logic, metaphysics. You can use a priori judgments, non-contradictory judgments, right, and you can get to universals. But in science, you can't, because, of course, all scientific evidence has to be grounded in observable facts, which are particular. That is to say, they're in space and time. A particular point in space, a particular point in time. So if that's the case, then the key thing that you know, science has to contend with, and ever and always has to contend with, is it has to be open to future discoveries. Scientists don't know what they don't know until they have discovered it, and that's why science changes so often. In fact, scientific paradigms change so often, and scientific theories, even about you know, the cosmos, you know, change so often. But there are certain consistent patterns, and so we can say, you know, in a general form, that, you know, science does reveal truths. We see, you know, certain patterns that, and they develop on each other and they accumulate, and the ones that are consistent, we keep them, but always with the caveat in mind that, you know, if some observable evidence comes up that contradicts it, we're going to have to change the science to accommodate it.
Well, we're going to take a break, and what's great about being Catholic is we are universal. And speaking of nuns, I heard you mention nun. We have some wonderful books about Mother Angelica. I wanted to tell you about Praying with Mother Angelica, a very, very popular book. Meditation on the Rosary, The Way of the Cross, and Other Prayers, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. And a book that's very important to me, My Life with Mother Angelica, by Sister Mary Raphael. Those of us who are here for years knew and loved her dearly. That's the first book. Here's The Life with Mother Angelica. It's a wonderful insight into Mother's life. Much more ahead with Father Spitzer talking about Galileo and evidence of God's existence. Stay with us. And thank you so much for staying with us as we are involved here in Father Spitzer's Universe. You can email us your questions at spitzer'suniverse, one word, at EWTN.com. Post your questions on Facebook at facebook.com/ EWTN Online, and it's a hashtag FS for Father Spitzer, FS Universe. Likewise, you can tweet us at twitter.com/EWTN, and it's hashtag FS Universe. In my old days, we'd call that a pound sign, but now it's a hashtag. So as we turn back to Father Spitzer out in sunny California, out there at Christ Cathedral Studios, we welcome you back as we're talking about the evidence for God's existence. Here's another question. Here's a name you brought up before, and here's a question about Copernicus.
Sure.
Okay, dear Father Spitzer, what do you think about Copernicus's views on the universe in relation to Galileo's? And this is from Pierre from New Brunswick, Canada. So there's a question about Copernicus in relation to Galileo. Is there a difference? How do they relate?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, Galileo's mathematical arguments for heliocentrism were a little bit more sophisticated than Copernicus's. But at the end of the day, Copernicus and Galileo certainly agreed that the heliocentric universe was plausible, and they did have the mathematical proof for it, but neither of them had the observational evidence for it. Copernicus had the humility not to proclaim it as a fact. Galileo did not, so there's a difference there. But for all intents and purposes, they are in agreement with heliocentrism. Nicholas Copernicus, of course, was a Catholic cleric, and Galileo was not, but he was certainly a theist and certainly somebody who I think really did acknowledge God in his own life.
Right. Now, in the case of Galileo, so as we said before, he had some pretty tight relationships, not only with the Pope, but some other cardinals, and I think even the cardinal who then became Pope was somebody, I think for his second trial, he actually thought that because of his relationship there, he might fare better. What exactly was his punishment? You alluded to it earlier.
Yeah, well, actually, his punishment was exile in an Italian villa that was actually really quite.
Can we sign up for that one?
Exactly. I know. I have to tell you, as punishment goes, it's really pretty good. Honestly, I think Urban VIII didn't want to, in any way, undermine Galileo's life. I mean, they had been friends together, and certainly Galileo was not tortured. Some have contended that he was tortured. It's certainly not. And Urban VIII would never have allowed it. And for all intents and purposes, people could come and go and visit with him. And of course, he did have a good relationship with his sister and others. There's a lot of very interesting, the exchange of the letters between them. Galileo was not an unhappy person in exile. Certainly he would have wanted to have, published and been a public figure, but, he kind of undermined himself. I mean, that's not a particularly smart thing to do. To insult the Pope who'd been your friend. I mean, he's the one guy that wanted to help you, and then you go in and mock him. Right. It's so strange. It's just like ego gone crazy, and then he sort of paid for it. But like I said, today, we would view his offense. A similar offense would be like, if you lie to the IRS, or you lie under oath in a court of law, or you lie in the financial statements of a corporation, and your investors lose money. Well, it's, the church felt responsible for this relationship between anthropology and cosmology at the time, and the Pope felt a real responsibility to it, much like a fiduciary has responsibilities to his or her investors. So the idea is, if you say you're going to do something, and then you do the opposite, and what you were asked to do was reasonable. Don't proclaim something as a fact without the evidence. That's a reasonable request. And then you go back you say, I won't do it, trust me, publish a book, and then go ahead and do it, then for all intents and purposes,
Right.
what you're dealing with is pretty much a lost cause at that juncture.
Right.
And like I said, be like lying on your investment, on your financial statements.
Let's not get personal with this, Father,
So-
about our own particular sins here in relation to taxes and things of the ilk. And you have a vast knowledge of the market from your earlier approach to life.
Oh, yes.
Let me ask you a question, though.
Yes, indeed.
I'm wondering, sometimes when I hear these things, when you hear theories and stuff like that, I wonder if we don't run into some of that sometimes ourselves in relation to the church, when there may be particular theologians who are positing certain ideas, or discussions are going on in Rome on different topics, that these things then get pushed forward as if they're fact or they're going to happen when they're purely under review.
That's right, and again, when this happens, the church does get, and has a right to be not only, agitated at this, because of course, when you're asked to do something, to hold up until they can put the evidence together, or hold up until there can be a substantial case made for something, and then somebody goes ahead and pushes it forward, and it does have impacts. It has impacts on people's spiritual lives, right? The church speaks for, a billion people, right? I mean, and not just the billion in the church, it speaks for way beyond, that billion. And so, it has a huge impact. And so theologians should be respectful of the church's position relative to creating this ambiance of secure, doctrine that is consistent with what, Jesus Christ meant, that it's consistent with what the Apostolic Church meant, it's consistent with where the Holy Spirit is inspiring the Pope to go. And you have to be respectful of that, because, nobody on the outside, without, having the charism of the Pope and the bishops, the charism of what's called magisterium, nobody can have a lock on truth and just sort of say, I'm going to go out on my own and do this. So for all intents and purposes, we have to be respectful of that. And yes, of course, when theologians do these kinds of things, they have an impact on the spiritual lives of many, many people. And of course, you have to be very careful that it's consistent with what Jesus and the Apostolic Church intended. What did Jesus have? What would Jesus say about this? And we have to ask ourselves that question. Put ultimately the authority into the hands of the Pope, who's been given that charism by Jesus himself, right? That I'm going to give you the keys to the kingdom of heaven. What you declare loosed on earth shall be loosed in heaven. Whatever you declare bound on earth shall be bound in heaven.
Okay, very good. Our next question. Here's an interesting take. The controversy about Galileo, this person's point, is often misunderstood. They say it was his mechanistic approach to the universe and not Earth's relationship to the position in the universe that I guess they're saying is the issue. Can you please explain this? This is Pat from Chicago. So what is your take on that?
Well, yeah, Pat, in point of fact, now we know that Galileo did have a mechanistic approach to the universe, because we're looking at that, right? We're looking back at his approach from the vantage point of today's quantum theory and Big Bang cosmology and relativity theory. Now, Galileo couldn't possibly have known about relativity theory, quantum theory, Big Bang cosmology in his day for obvious reasons. Now, the point, though, is that mechanistic theory that he had, if you don't put an only in front of it, right, this is the only way that the universe can be explained, this is the only way of explaining falling bodies, etc. If you don't put an only in front of it, it was brilliant. I mean, the law of falling bodies, the use of algebraic language as a generic formulation to describe those laws, the discovery of the constants of falling bodies, right, and so forth, the constant acceleration, of different masses of falling bodies. These things were really important, brilliant discoveries and a great foundation for science, and we don't want to take away anything from that. However, in retrospect, yes, Galileo's views are mechanistic by comparison with the more holistic views of science and nature that we have today in light of quantum and relativity theory. So, but for his time, though, he was out there and he was right on, and he provided the right kind of mathematical foundations for physics, and we have to give him credit where credit is due.
Now, one of the things I've read in doing a little research on Galileo, thanks to my wonderful assistant Dottie, one of the things Matthew Bunson, who a lot of people know from EWTN, brought up was the fact that in an article he said that as the ideas and writings of Galileo were quite innovative and controversial, the church officials felt obligated to respond in the way they felt best to defend the faith, which was their primary task. It also struck me, and he goes on to mention this point, and others do as well, that some of this was also fodder for the Protestant Reformation movement too, and as a way of using that information in the Galileo case against the church, right?
Right, and of course, I don't know if that was Urban VIII's real problem, but it was certainly an extrinsic problem that I think both Galileo and the Pope were aware of. In other words, when you start making these kinds of statements, are you going to kind of play into, the diplomacy of, kind of making a rift between Protestants and Catholics, and then giving maybe Protestants some fodder to criticize the Catholic Church? Certainly the Pope was aware of this. Very certainly, too, Galileo was aware of this. I think it was a significant tangential issue, but the real issue was, do you have the facts or don't you have the facts? If you don't have the observable facts, don't proclaim it as a fact. And as I said, that's the same requirement we use today for any peer-reviewed scientific journal. And if you publish something as a fact that you don't have the evidence for, you will be forced to retract it. And of course, you will bring great shame on yourself in so doing. And of course, in Galileo's time, there wasn't a peer-reviewed natural science community that could do this. Essentially, the church was doing it from the vantage point of the spiritual consequences of a theory that was as yet unproven.
Okay, very good. Here's another question coming in that just came in a response to some information you just came up with. I'll read it here off of my iPad. What do you think of Teilhard de Chardin? And he is, of course, a French philosopher and priest. Many people have heard about him and his opinions. What about his opinions and belief? Does the church accept them? This is Barbara from Anchorage, Alaska. Okay, very good. Teilhard de Chardin.
Yeah.
How does that fit into everything we're talking about, or does it?
Yeah. Well, in a way, it sort of does. I mean, Teilhard de Chardin was a French Jesuit who was, obviously a good scientist, a very, fine anthropologist in his own right, and he did have a series of theories. Now, the Peking man controversy is again, a problem, relative to, what I'm going to call the evidence issue, because he really didn't have the evidence for, to assert Peking man as a link in a particular chain. And of course, because he made that assertion, as it were, science came back to haunt him and said, well, you kind of went over the top there. You kind of overplayed the evidence card. But, Teilhard also, made some assertions relative to the fall and original sin, which were very difficult to kind of reconcile with church doctrine. He did do some things that were correct, though. He certainly, his view of basically an omega point, that is to say, his view that there is like God as a final cause, drawing nature, into kind of an evolutionary cycle, right? That where, as it were, divine, design and the divine, order of things was kind of drawing things into, to its final fulfillment. That actually really works by many constructs of evolutionary theory today. In other words, Teilhard was by no means, what's called a materialistic, evolutionary guy, right? So by no means was Teilhard in any way, suggesting that all there was is embodiment. All there was a material world, that we didn't have an individual soul created by God. Teilhard certainly believed we had an individual soul created by God. So, the first thing, is that Teilhard was not off the wall. He wasn't a materialist. In fact, he was so much not a materialist that his view of evolution is that God is guiding it, as it were, as a final cause at all times. So there's two different views, of how God could interact with the evolutionary process. One view is called efficient causation, and that's where God would be doing it kind of from behind and sort of influencing it as it goes along. The other one is that God could be doing it from up front, so he could, be, as it were, calling, the whole of, history to its conclusion. So he's sort of, drawing it to its fulfillment and to its finality. So these are some of the key features.
Very good.
Of Teilhard that are still usable today. Right. But yeah, he had some difficulties for sure.
Right, and also, like most things like Galileo, there's people will sometimes take pieces of it and exploit it. So we're going to take a break here, talking with Father Robert Spitzer, and we want to mention a couple of wonderful books from Father Spitzer that tie into our series here, Finding True Happiness, Our Lives Show Satisfying Our Restless Hearts. That's one book by Father Spitzer, and another book by Father Spitzer, that was the one up on the screen right now. We also have The Soul's Upward Yearning, Clues to Our Transcendent Nature from Experience and Reason, which fits in very much into the discussions we're having today. Two wonderful books available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Much more ahead as we return to Father Spitzer's Universe after this. And I'm Doug Keck. Thank you for staying with us here in Father Spitzer's Universe. One of the newest emanations in his universe is a new book, God So Loved the World, Clues to Our Transcendent Destiny, from the Revelation of Jesus, book number 3, published by Ignatius, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com. And we turn back to Father Spitzer out there, and let me ask you, Father, how's the book doing? How is God So Loved the World doing?
It's doing very well. I think simply because there's a lot of good evidence, contemporary evidence for the resurrection from N.T. Wright and others that I summarized in I hope, an intelligible way. And then the appendix on the Shroud of Turin is particularly popular too. It's called Science in the Shroud of Turin, and just looking at a lot of the evidence, the dating of the shroud, the evidence for the resurrection on the shroud, and that's kind of popular too. So yeah, the book is selling actually very well, and Ignatius Press certainly helps a lot by putting it on the front page or something of their catalog. So I'm happy.
And we're trying to do our little bit here at EWTN as well for you.
You certainly do. You certainly do.
So that's we have more questions ahead, and it's a wonderful book. People should check it out, EWTNRC.com. Also, I wanted to mention, you were on talking, I guess, on Al Cresta's show. I think it was the end of last week, talking about the Shroud of Turin. And so I know that's personal interest to you.
That's
very
right.
interesting program. So anyway, people can check that out as well.
In fact, you bet.
We've got a great lineup of radio hosts as well. Let's move on to our next question here. On a recent show, you made a statement that God is, quote unquote, completely outside the universe, How can that be? Question mark. God lives and moves and has his being through, with, and in us, and we live and move and have our being through, with, and in him. It seems that we are one with God. Granted, there will always be a revealing of God to us, and God is not confined to this universe, but he is present in it. With all my love, Teresa. So what do you say to that, Father?
Hey, Teresa. Oh, very good question. Here's the key thing to be aware of. Let me make three distinctions between pantheism, panentheism, and transcendental theism. Because, you know, the statement you make, Teresa, is very true, but you have to have it in the right context. Transcendental theism means that, like, the whole universe is like a thought in God's mind. So, you know, God is, as it were, thinking the thought of the whole universe. And by the way, he thinks the thought of heaven, which is a different thought. And he thinks the thought of, if there's another universe somewhere, he's thinking that universe. So remember that that is God, who's, as I'm going to say, outside or beyond, right? And I put it in scare quotes, the universe, because, of course, the universe is a thought in his mind. Let's call that transcendental theism. But you don't want to get that mixed up with pantheism. Pantheism means that, you know, that God is somehow so much a part of our universe that he's reduced to the universe. So in other words, you know, if you add up the sum total of the whole universe, God's in there somewhere. And let's call that God is everywhere hypothesis pantheism. So God's not the thinker of the thought of the universe. God's sort of reducible to the sum total of the universe. And then you have another thing which is called panentheism, where in a way, you know, God is not beyond the universe completely. He's only beyond the universe slightly. And what that means is somehow the universe it controls him, even though in a way, you know, he's beyond it. It's still sort of so constitutive of him that it actually controls him by nature. Now, the church has you know, condemned the last two, pantheism and panentheism, as incorrect. So when we say that God is in us and through us, and what you're saying is all true, you have to do it from the perspective of that's because God, the whole universe and everything in the universe is a thought in God's mind. Yes. And I'm using mind here in the sense of St. Thomas Aquinas as a simple, unrestricted act of thinking, right? I'm not talking about a brain or something like that. So the idea then is you have to look at it that way, and then your statement is correct. But you also have to say that God is beyond or outside the universe, that God can't be reduced to the universe. So when we say that God's in us and through us, that's absolutely correct. But he is beyond us. He's beyond the whole universe, because the whole universe is a thought in his mind. So that's basically the way the church has answered it. And by the way, Lonergan's proof for the existence of God in Insight makes that very clear. And I have a proof for the existence of God based on Thomistic principles in a book called New Proofs of the Existence of God, which you can also read, that makes that very clear. So, but you do have to keep them kind of straight. Otherwise, you have poor God being reduced to the universe.
Right. And it's interesting, too, because sometimes I think we have a certain amount of Eastern mysticism that's kind of filtered into the general culture. And I think we end up sometimes with the force be with you being kind of our understanding of how God works in our lives. And obviously, that's not what we're talking about. Here's another question that just came in. Go ahead, Father. Go ahead, Father.
Oh, no, I was just going to say some of those forms of mysticism can be pantheistic or panentheistic.
Right, exactly.
And of course, the church doesn't hold that.
Right. Okay. So we'll move on to our next question for you then. Just came in. Dear Father Spitzer, recent scientific discussion is focused on what's called dark matter. What is your understanding currently on this topic? Regards, Dermot from Ireland. Dark matter.
Yeah, good, Dermot. The current thinking, and this is pretty much verified by the Cosmic Background Explorer satellite, the WMAP satellite, and now the Max Planck satellite. We do have some fairly significant evidence that the universe breaks down into three fundamental constituents. The first is what's called visible matter, and that's the matter we're all accustomed to, right? That's the matter that has the four forces of our universe, right? The electromagnetic force, the strong nuclear force, the weak force, and the gravitational force. So that, that's giving rise to the lights that are in the studio, or giving rise to the sun, right? The strong nuclear force, right, which is, converting, fusing hydrogen into helium and giving rise to the warmth and the light of the sun and so forth. So let's call that visible matter, and that's 5% of the matter in the universe. And by the way, matter and energy are convertible, so I'm just going to call it, that's 5% of the matter-energy in the universe. There is approximately 25% of the universe is what's called dark matter. Now, dark matter is exactly what it may seem like, right? In other words, dark matter is stuff that affects the gravitational field, right? So we have a gravitational field, we have a space-time field that it collapses with matter. So matter collapses the space-time field, causing gravitational effects. Now, that's the one thing that visible matter and dark matter have in common. But after that, dark matter doesn't have any, it doesn't emit light, it doesn't receive light or absorb light. So, right, dark matter is dark. It doesn't have those other forces that are giving rise to heat and light, but it does exist, and it seems to exist in very fine particles, by the way, which are probably passing through your body right now. And that'd be about 25% of our universe. Now, the reason that we think that is because the galaxies are not flying apart. But hold on to that for 1 minute, and I'll get you the third constituent of our universe. The third constituent of our universe is called dark energy. Now, dark energy is very different from dark matter. In fact, it's the opposite, really, of dark matter. Dark energy causes the space-time field not to collapse in upon itself and cause a force of attraction. Dark energy actually causes the space-time field to expand rapidly, to expand in an accelerated way. Now, when that happens, when the universe is expanding very, very rapidly, you have a repulsive effect, and which is the exact opposite of gravitation, what matter does to the space-time field, which is an attractive force, right? So now, dark energy is a big force of repulsion. And we think right now that 70% of the universe's matter energy is dark energy. So 5% is visible matter, 25% is dark matter, 70% is dark energy. Now, because we have 70% dark energy in the universe, we do not think that the universe will collapse in upon itself. So remember the old oscillating theory or bouncing theory of the universe that was sometimes postulated, where the universe is expanding and then contracting, expanding and then recontracting, etc. That sounds today very, very implausible. Essentially,
so, Father,
if we do
let
have
me just
70%,
tell you this. We are entering our own black hole here, as we are rapidly approaching the light speed here and having to depart for this week. And of course, we'll pick up on much more of this. Continue your answer next week. It's always great to hear from you. Wonderful answers. A lot of questions will be coming next week. We'll see you next week. God bless. And that's the one and only Father Spitzer there from Christ Cathedral, our studios. And of course, check out the Magis Center, magiscenter.com. And of course, there's a listing of wonderful books, all available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com. Again, next week we'll be back with more of a discussion on God's existence and how that has to do with science. I'm Doug Keck. We'll see you next Wednesday as we re-enter Father Spitzer's universe. Thank you so much for staying with us. See you next week.